professor of linguistics at MIT. Noam Chomsky is a world-renowned scholar and political analyst. He has written and lectured extensively on philosophy, international affairs, U.S. foreign policy, and the mass media, and was the subject of the award-winning film Manufacturing Consent. Any attempt to look behind the headlines into complex history of the region, economics or geopolitics is almost impossible, because any departure from exclusive focus on genocide makes one almost a supporter of genocide. So in order for us not to lose half of our audience, we just have no choice but to start with, atrocities, ethnic cleansing, emotionally charged arguments. So let me start by asking you about this basic argument that we hear, that U.S. military intervention is necessary to stop genocide in Kosovo, just like 50 years ago we went to war to stop Hitler.
Well, first of all, we didn't go to war to stop Hitler, so let's put that aside. The U.S. went to war with Hitler when Hitler declared war on the United States. Through the late 1930s, the United States was rather supportive of Hitler and very enthusiastic about Mussolini. As for intervention to stop actions to stop ethnic cleansing and humanitarian catastrophes and so on, I think that's really important. And if anyone in the United States, or the U.S. or British governments or other European governments were interested in doing that, they could do it very easily in far more serious cases than this, current cases. So, for example, you're absolutely right that we get our orders from the state to focus attention just on this and to look at it in a particular way. But anyone with an independent mind is going to refuse those orders and try to understand what's going on. And there are easy ways to do it. So, for example, look not very far away at, say, Turkey, right next door. In Turkey, in the mid-1990s, under the Clinton administration, the military was carrying out ethnic cleansing, destruction of villages, massacres, torture, and terror on a scale way beyond anything that was claimed in Kosovo. And this is in the Kurdish areas. There were perhaps several thousand villages destroyed, roughly 2 or 3 million refugees, maybe tens of thousands of people killed, right in the mid-90s. As the atrocity, it was done with U.S. arms, overwhelmingly, about 80%. As the atrocities increased, Clinton increased the arms flow to make sure that they went on. In fact, when human rights groups like Human Rights Watch discovered that U.S. jets were being used illegally in violation of congressional restrictions to attack civilian targets, the Clinton administration found various ways around them and kept sending them. And this is to stop those, to act to prevent those atrocities would be quite simple. All we have to do is stop participating in them. But
then it brings us to the question, which massacres are fit for U.S. moral crusade?
Let's take a look at massacres, okay? The terms like massacre and genocide and so on are used very freely when people want to use them. So let's take a look at what the United States and NATO claim to be the case. And I'll assume that everything they say is true. So let's take U.S. NATO assertions about Kosovo. What they say is that up to February 1999, that's this year, okay, up to February 1999, up to March 1999, until the bombing started, there were about 2,000 people killed on all sides in Kosovo, most of them Albanian, probably the large majority of the 2,000. There were a couple 100,000 refugees. This was, according to the United States, largely, the violence began with attacks on police, Yugoslavian police, in Kosovo, which is a province of Yugoslavia, by the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army. Attacks from across the border, based and supported abroad. The Serbian army reacted, and police reacted very brutally to that, pretty much in the way we're familiar with in, say, Lebanon, where Israel reacts to attacks on its soldiers that way. With retaliation against civilians, that led to further retaliation by KLA against Serbian civilians, and a cycle of violence built up through early this year. Well, that's a humanitarian crisis, all right, but unfortunately one that's duplicated in many, many parts of the world. For example, it's almost identical to what the State Department describes as being the case in Colombia. Approximately the same number of people killed, another 300,000 refugees last year, according to the State Department, added to well over 1 million. The overwhelming majority of atrocities attributed to the Army and its paramilitary associates, who are funded by the United States with increasing flow of arms, and we can continue around the world. So that's what's now called genocide in the very specific case of Kosovo. Now, what happened on March 23rd, 24th? Well, the United States presented the Yugoslav government with an ultimatum, the Rambouillet Agreement. Although it wasn't reported here, as far as I can discover, the Serbian National Assembly rejected it, but made a counterproposal. The counterproposal was kind of vague. We don't know exactly what it meant. The State Department representative, James Rubin, was asked at a press conference on March 24th about this Serbian Assembly counteroffer, and he said, we saw no silver lining in it, so we decided to bomb. Okay, that's the end of the diplomacy. First of all, they very strongly condemned the withdrawal of the monitors, the international advisors.
Why did they leave in the first place?
They were told to leave by the U.S. The Serbian government strongly opposed that, and in the same resolution that you're talking about, they once again condemn it. They wanted the monitors back. And yes, they have a resolution saying what it says is roughly after autonomy is negotiated among the various ethnic communities, we will consider the question of an international presence to guarantee, the safety and so on of everyone. Well, okay, maybe it's a good offer, maybe it's not a good offer, but there's certainly room for diplomacy. The U.S. simply refused.
Wouldn't the international community be interested actually in having as much as possible international presence, these monitors?
Well, first of all, there's no international community. The term international community is a term of propaganda, U.S. propaganda. There is no involvement of the international community here. Zero. The United States would not allow it. The international community is the United Nations. The international community is not NATO. The NATO powers, with varying degrees of commitment, are following the U.S. lead on this, but they do not constitute the international community, though that term is used here to refer to the United States and its allies. I mean, India is part of the international community, China is part of it, South Africa is part of it, Latin America is part of it. They're mostly opposed.
Seems like liberal people have replaced analysis of these geopolitical economic factors with moral outrage, and I want to ask you about that because this seems to be totally new situation, and
It's not new. Liberals means, educated people, essentially, the majority of educated people. They tend to support state atrocities overwhelmingly. I mean, they supported the U.S. war in Vietnam, for example. How many faculty members did you see, or editors, and so on? In fact, Vietnam was a liberals' war. It was the aggression, the attack against South Vietnam, which is what it was launched by John F. Kennedy. He's the one who sent U.S. Air Force planes to bomb South Vietnamese civilians, authorized the use of napalm, initiated crop destruction, started driving millions of people into concentration camps. It was supported by the liberal community, educated community, right through until the time when business turned against it. Corporate America turned against it on pragmatic grounds. It was becoming too costly. In fact, if you want to see what the attitude of liberals was, just have a look at yesterday's lead editorial in the New York Times, which happens to capture it quite accurately. They say that we shouldn't be hobbled by the Vietnam analogy in bombing Kosovo and maybe invading it. And their reasons are that in the case of Vietnam, the sacrifices of the United States were too high, and the gains were uncertain. Well, there were people on the German general staff who said the same thing about Hitler after Stalingrad. That's not opposition to the war. And if the issue here is humanitarian, there are very simple ways to stop much worse humanitarian crises. In fact, right in that region. And notice that the U.S. bombing, the U.S.-NATO bombing, radically escalated the atrocities, exactly as was expected. I mean, when you bomb people, they react. And the way they reacted is exactly as any rational person expected, namely where they're strong, not where you're strong, which happens to be on the ground. So up until the bombing, the level of there were certainly atrocities, but they were at the level that you find all over the world. For example, the kind that the U.S. supports in Colombia, way below what the U.S. supports in Turkey. After the bombing, it's beginning to be comparable to other cases. So, for example, there was the Israeli press has the major journal there, Haaretz, which is kind of like the New York Times. They had an article by one of their major correspondents pointing out, in effect, that Kosovo is becoming like Palestine, Israel and Palestine in 1947-48, except with TV cameras. And in fact, that's accurate. The numbers are about the same. The numbers expelled are about the same. In fact, higher than the numbers killed are about the same, and so on.